September 1st, 1943. Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai's hand paused over the intelligence report. His one good eye, the other lost to American gunners a year earlier, scanning words that made him laugh out loud in the humid operations tent. The Americans have produced a new fighter, heavy as a bomber, wide as a transport. They call it Hellcat. Our intelligence suggests it weighs twice our Zero, another American failure of design. Through the tent flaps, he could see his squadron's A6M Zeros lined up on the pierced steel planking. Sleek, nimble, deadly. For 2 years, these aircraft had dominated Pacific skies. British Hurricanes, American P-40S, Dutch Brewster Buffaloes, all had fallen before the Zero's guns. The Americans' latest attempt, this bloated Hellcat, would be no different. What Sakai didn't know, what none of the Japanese naval aviators gathering for their morning briefing knew, was that in exactly 30 days, this failure would begin the systematic annihilation of Japanese naval aviation. The F6F Hellcat would achieve a kill ratio of 19-1, destroying 5,223 enemy aircraft while losing only 270 in aerial combat. It would transform carrier warfare, break the back of Japanese air power, and prove that the Zero's reign of terror had been built on a foundation of fatal assumptions. The mathematics of aerial supremacy were about to be rewritten by an aircraft that looked wrong, flew heavy, and seemed to violate every principle the Japanese had perfected. Yet, within 6 months, the very pilots now laughing at intelligence reports would be writing final letters home, knowing that encountering Hellcats meant statistical certainty of death. The rising sun's zenith, the Japanese Navy's confidence in September 1943 wasn't arrogance. It was mathematics. Since December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had achieved victory ratios that defied belief. At Pearl Harbor, they lost 29 aircraft while destroying 347. In the Philippines, 7 losses against 103 destroyed. Over Darwin, 2 losses versus 30. The British Far East Fleet's air arm annihilated. The Dutch East Indies Air Force eliminated in days. At the center of this dominance flew the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, an aircraft that had rewritten the rules of fighter design. When captured examples were tested by American engineers in 1942, they initially refused to believe the performance figures. A fighter with the range of a bomber, the maneuverability of a biplane, and the firepower to destroy anything it caught. It seemed impossible. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who would become Japan's ace of aces with 87 confirmed kills, described the Zero in his recovered diary. Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. The aircraft responds to thought, not just control input. American planes fly like trucks, powerful but clumsy. They build fighters like they build cars, heavy, overbuilt, wasteful. The Zero achieved its miraculous performance through revolutionary design philosophy. Extra superduralumin, a classified aluminum alloy, created a structure 30% lighter than comparable American designs. No armor plate protected the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks added weight. Even the radio was often removed to save 30 pounds. Every ounce sacrificed for performance. The intelligence dismissal. The first reports of the F6F Hellcat reached Japanese intelligence through neutral Swedish sources in early 1943. The specifications seemed like propaganda or perhaps deliberate misinformation. The aircraft weighed 12,186 pounds loaded. The Zero weighed 5,800. Its wing area spanned 334 square feet with a draggy radial engine. It carried 2,400 rounds of ammunition, armor plate everywhere, bulletproof glass, self-sealing tanks holding 250 gallons of fuel. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who had planned Pearl Harbor, reviewed the specifications at Combined Fleet Headquarters. His analysis, preserved in the Japanese Defense Archives, was dismissive. The Americans have learned nothing. This Hellcat represents the continuation of their failed philosophy, attempting to overcome pilot skill with weight of machinery. A Zero will fly circles around it. The mathematics seem to support his assessment. The Zero's wing loading of 22 pounds per square foot gave it a turning radius of 612 feet. The Hellcat's wing loading of 36.5 pounds per square foot suggested a turning radius over 900 feet. In a turning fight, the basis of all Japanese fighter tactics, the Hellcat would be helpless. The first glimpse, September 30th, 1943. Marcus Island, Petty Officer. First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort for a reconnaissance mission when he spotted them, 6 dark blue shapes climbing from the southeast. His first thought, recorded in his after-action report, B-25 bombers on a strange heading. Then they turned, and he saw the distinctive silhouette. Single engine, massive fuselage, wings that seemed too short for the body. First encounter with F6F type fighter, he would write. Initial impression, Americans have mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber, engaged with standard tactics. Standard tactics meant using the Zero's superior turn rate to get on the enemy's tail. Fukui rolled into a diving turn, expecting the heavy American fighter to continue straight, allowing him to curve onto its 6 o'clock position. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The Hellcat didn't run. It didn't try to turn with him. It went vertical. The Pratt & Whitney R2800, double wasp engine, producing 2,000 horsepower, 700 more than the Zero's Nakajima Sake's 1,130 horsepower, drove the Hellcat upward at 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui, attempting to follow, watched his airspeed decay as the Zero struggled against gravity. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat performed a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible for its weight, a hammerhead turn that dropped it directly onto Fukui's tail. The American opened fire at 400 meters, Fukui reported. 6 machine guns, not the 4 we expected. The volume of fire was unprecedented. My aircraft took 17 hits in 3 seconds. Only by dropping into a spin did I escape. Fukui barely made it back to Marcus Island with his Zero riddled with holes. His wingman, Petty Officer 2nd Class Masao, didn't return. Neither did the reconnaissance plane they were escorting. First blood to the Hellcat. Task Force 14 struck Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what appeared to be another nuisance raid. American carriers had been launching these hit-and-run attacks for months, usually fleeing before Japanese fighters could fully engage. This time would be different. We climbed to 20,000 feet, Shiga recorded in his diary. Below us, 12 F6F fighters in 3 divisions. We held every advantage, altitude, position, surprise. Victory was certain. The engagement that followed shattered Japanese tactical doctrine. As the Zeros dove on the Hellcats, the American fighters didn't scatter or attempt to turn. They maintained formation, accelerating in a gentle dive that kept their energy high. When the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, hoping for lucky hits, the Hellcats simply absorbed the punishment. The Hellcat's armor included 212 pounds of plate protecting the pilot, 110 pounds around the oil system, and self-sealing tanks that could take dozens of hits. As the Zeros exhausted their ammunition in diving passes, the Hellcats executed their counterattack. Instead of turning to dogfight, they used their weight as a weapon. Climbing at full power, they reached altitudes where the Zero's engine struggled for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still producing 1,650 horsepower. The Zero was down to 900. "They came down on us like hawks on sparrows," Shiga wrote. "Their weight gave them speed we couldn't match. They would dive, fire those 6 terrible guns, then climb away before we could react." 8 Zeros were shot down. No Hellcats were lost. The assembled pilots of the 204th Air Group listened as Lieutenant Commander Taro Tanamizu briefed them on American tactics. Tanamizu, with 32 victories, was one of the few pilots who had survived multiple encounters with Hellcats. "Forget everything you know about air combat," he told them. "The Americans have changed the rules. They no longer fight our fight. They fight like executioners, not warriors." Tanamizu explained what Japanese pilots were slowly, fatally learning. The Hellcat wasn't designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed to never need to. Using a combat doctrine called energy fighting, Hellcat pilots maintained speed and altitude, converting potential energy to kinetic energy and slashing attacks that gave Zero pilots no chance to use their superior maneuverability. "They work in pairs," Tanamizu continued. "One high, one low. While you engage one, the other is already diving on you. Their radios, which we laughed at for adding weight, let them coordinate perfectly. We fly as individual samurai. They fight as a machine." The technology gulf, 1944. By early 1944, Japanese pilots began describing the Hellcat in the same fearful tone Allied pilots had once used for the Zero. What few realized was that behind every visible advantage lay an invisible war of technology and logistics. The Hellcat was not just an aircraft, it was an industrial weapon. Designed by Grumman engineers under Leroy Grumman and Bill Schwendler, it was built using lessons learned from every previous naval fighter failure. The XF6F-1 prototype had originally been designed around the Wright R2600 engine, producing only 1,700 horsepower. But when flight tests revealed the Zero's superior climb and acceleration, Grumman didn't start over. They redesigned on the spot, strengthening the airframe to accept the massive Pratt and Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. That decision changed the war. The Double Wasp was a masterpiece of American engineering. 18 cylinders, twin-row radial design, producing over 2,000 horsepower while remaining reliable under tropical heat and salt air. The same engine would later power the F4U Corsair, the P-47 Thunderbolt, and the P-61 Black Widow. Japanese engineers couldn't match it. The Nakajima Hamar, intended as its equivalent, produced only 1,850 horsepower, and even that only at emergency settings that quickly overheated. Japan's metallurgical industry simply couldn't produce alloys capable of sustaining such power without frequent failures. In combat, that meant the Hellcat could climb while taking hits, dive faster without structural failure, and keep fighting after absorbing damage that would have torn a Zero apart. The pilot equation. By 1944, Japan's real crisis wasn't aircraft, it was pilots. The Hellcat's kill ratios weren't merely a reflection of machine superiority, but of an entire training system designed for attrition warfare. When the Pacific War began, Japan's elite naval aviators were the best in the world, veterans of China and Nomonhan with thousands of flight hours. But they were irreplaceable. Japanese training produced only about 100 new naval pilots per year. After Midway, when 4 fleet carriers and 110 veteran pilots were lost, the system collapsed. By contrast, the United States Navy had, by 1943, implemented an industrial-scale pilot training program. Naval Air Training Command produced over 8,000 pilots a year. every one of them trained on advanced simulators, gunnery ranges, and standardized procedures. The Hellcat was designed for those pilots, not aces, but competent, disciplined, average men who would fly as a team. Every system was built for survivability and simplicity. The wide-track landing gear made carrier operations nearly foolproof. The massive cockpit provided visibility and armor protection. Maintenance crews could replace an engine in under 4 hours. In the words of test pilot Robert Hall, the Hellcat was the first fighter you could mass-produce without mass casualties. The turning point, the Marianas, June 1944. If there was a single moment when the Hellcat erased the Zero from Pacific skies, it came during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the engagement that history would call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. June 19, 1944. Over 450 Japanese aircraft rose from Guam, Rota, and the carriers Taiho, Shokaku, and Zukaku. Awaiting them, 476 F6F Hellcats from 15 U.S. carriers. Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell, commanding Air Group 15 aboard USS Essex, described the radio chatter, "Hellcats to all divisions. Remember your training. No turning fights. Climb, dive, shoot, climb again. Make them fight on our terms." For 4 hours, the sky became a slaughterhouse. Japanese pilots, many with fewer than 100 hours of flight time, charged into coordinated Hellcat formations. The result was one-sided beyond comprehension. Of the 373 Japanese aircraft that attacked that morning, 243 were shot down. U.S. losses, 29. McCampbell alone shot down 7 that day, later adding 9 more in a single mission, the highest single-day tally by any U.S. Navy pilot. Rear Admiral Jisaku Okada's after-action report was devastatingly simple. Our aircraft cannot compete with the Hellcat. Our pilots cannot match their skill. Our factories cannot replace what we lose. The skies over the Marianas are now theirs, the design philosophy that won. The Hellcat's secret wasn't beauty or innovation. It was ruthless pragmatism. Grumman engineers joked that the F6F was designed to bring a pilot back alive. Every element served that goal. The cockpit armor was positioned based on analysis of combat damage from earlier F4F Wildcats. Fuel lines were roted to avoid the pilot's seat. The landing gear was strengthened to handle brutal carrier landings. Even the ammunition feed was redesigned to avoid jams under high-G maneuvers. The plane was built by what sailors affectionately called the Grumman Iron Works. Over 12,000 Hellcats were produced between 1942 and 1945, and almost every one served in combat. Production averaged 400 a month, peaking at 644 in March 1945. Unlike Japanese aircraft production, which required master craftsmen and hand-fitted parts, the Hellcat could be assembled by unskilled workers using interchangeable components. Wings from one factory fit perfectly on fuselages from another. That modularity allowed combat-damaged aircraft to be repaired aboard carriers in hours rather than days. The psychological shift. By late 1944, something unprecedented occurred. American pilots began to pity their opponents. Commander Alex Vrasiu, who scored 19 victories, recalled in an interview, "You could see them coming, weaving, trying the old tricks that worked in 1942, but the Hellcat could just pull up, roll, and drop on them. We knew, and they knew, the fight was already decided." Japanese intelligence intercepted American radio transmissions describing aerial engagements as turkey shoots, a term that entered both sides' vocabulary. For Japanese morale, it was catastrophic. Veteran pilots who survived engagements began writing reports suggesting the Zero be retired from frontline service. Their suggestions were ignored. Japan's industry couldn't produce a replacement in meaningful numbers. The numbers don't lie. By war's end, Hellcat pilots had achieved 19 of the 20 highest individual victory counts in the U.S. Navy. 19-to-1 overall kill ratio. Over 75% of all U.S. Navy air victories credited to the F6F. Average pilot survival rate after being hit, 62%, triple that of F4F Wildcat pilots in 1942. The Hellcat's guns, 650 caliber Browning M2s, fired a combined 72 pounds of lead per second. At convergence range, the volume of fire was equivalent to the broadside of a destroyer. When U.S. engineers examined wrecked Zeros after engagements, they discovered an uncomfortable truth. Japanese fighters could not evolve fast enough to survive the industrial tempo of the war America was now waging. Endgame, 1945. By the time the Hellcat escorted B-29 raids over Japan, the Imperial Navy no longer existed as a coherent force. Kamikaze attacks became the last desperate weapon, and even then, it was often Hellcats that intercepted them before they could strike. Saburo Sakai, who had once laughed at the fat American fighter, survived the war. In 1949, he met several former Hellcat pilots at a veterans event in Tokyo. When asked what he thought of the Hellcat now, he reportedly smiled and said, "The Hellcat was not beautiful, but it was honest. It did what it was built to do, win the war." The legacy. The F6F Hellcat was retired from frontline service in 1954. By then, it had become the most successful naval fighter in history. It taught a new doctrine, that survivability, reliability, and teamwork mattered more than raw agility or theoretical elegance. Its influence shaped every American fighter that followed. The F-8 Crusader, the F-4 Phantom, the F-14 Tomcat. Each inherited its core philosophy. The pilot's life comes first. The machine must take punishment, and victory must be measured not by performance charts, but by who returns home. For Japan, the Hellcat marked the end of an era. The samurai spirit had met industrial warfare and lost. As aviation historian Barrett Tillman would later write, "The Zero was a sword. The Hellcat was a hammer. And in modern war, the hammer always wins." The Hellcat's last laugh. In 1945, as U.S. carriers sailed into Tokyo Bay, F-6Fs circled overhead, engines idling, wings folded. Below them lay the wreckage of an empire that had once ruled the Pacific skies. The fighter that was too heavy, too slow, too ungainly, had achieved what few machines ever do. It had changed the outcome of a global war. The Zero's reign ended not in a single battle, but in the relentless mechanical inevitability of an idea. That technology, discipline, and mass production could defeat artistry and courage. And so, when the last Hellcat shut down its engine aboard the USS Lexington and the deck crews fell silent, they weren't just witnessing the end of a war. They were witnessing the birth of a new world, one in which air power would belong forever to those who built not the fastest fighter, but the smartest one.